Why do Halo fans hate Halo 4? That's funny because I'm a Halo fan and I don't hate Halo 4.
Look, it's just the title to communicate the topic of the video. I'm not talking about every Halo fan, it's why are there Halo fans that hate Halo 4 and what are the reasons that they hate Halo 4. But that'd be a terrible title and you wouldn't have clicked on that video now, would you? Be still, young ones, for I've returned to Halo. It's like I never left. Halo 4 is a big fish to fry and one I've been meaning to cook up for a long time. I think I've just about landed on the right recipe. You've likely heard a notable amount of criticism levied at Halo 4 over the years from longtime Halo fans. Perhaps you're wondering why. Well, let me explain. I was among those impossibly hyped for Halo 4 before it came out. I'm also among those who really don't like Halo 4. So this review will inevitably be coloured by my own tastes and clouded by my own feelings towards the game. Before the release of Halo 4, there was a very strong air of anticipation. Even coming off Reach and some of its missteps, there was still a lot of steam left in the Halo series, and new Halo releases could still rely on the goodwill established in the previous titles. It was also compounded by the fact that we were finally returning to the perspective of the Master Chief, the most recognizable Halo character. We were inhabiting the shoes of other random helmet dudes, but they never had the same draw. It is the recognizable figure of the Master Chief, the iconic, and that fat old number on the box that served to build anticipation. We were excited because it was meant to be a proper follow-up to the previous trilogy of games. They'd never messed up Halo before, at least not for most people. Reach was good, with notable missteps, but overwhelmingly positively received. I didn't really pay much attention to the fact that there was a new developer at the helm, 343 Industries. They'd been established in 2007, around the time Bungie went independent. At first they managed community matters, Halo Waypoint and such. Then they went on to expand in the background, taking over more expanded universe duties and hiring staff for development from studios such as Pandemic, the creators of Star Wars Battlefront. They started work on Halo 4 in 2009. Bungie finished Halo Reach and released in 2010. They also made a map pack for it before saying sayonara in 2012. 343's first game was Combat Evolved Anniversary in 2011, and it wasn't really a great intro. Its art wasn't really faithful to the spirit or direction of the original. 343 officially got their control of the Halo franchise in March 2012. They got a start by working on Halo Reach updates and new DLC maps. Halo 4 was officially revealed in 2011, and this time honestly constituted my fondest memories of Halo 4. There were countless videos online claiming to show leaked footage of Halo 4, and they were either a weapon overlaid on footage of some Gmod Halo map, or footage of a completely different game entirely with a rickroll. The people who put in a bit more effort definitely got more notoriety. This was around the time this Gravemind image circulated around everywhere, although it had popped up earlier. I remember reading two of the Greg Bear Halo novels before Halo came out, and I was excited about it. They were pretty good, but it seemed like basically a brand new sci-fi world with its own world building. Greg Bear is quite a quality established sci-fi writer. He wrote Eon and Blood Music. He's won several Hugo and Nebula awards, so the novels were notably in-depth. All this anticipation finally led up to the moment. On the same day Obama won his second term, Halo 4 released. And I was kind of stunned. I didn't know what to think, but with the passing of time it became clear what I was feeling. Disappointment. I wanted to believe it was good. I told myself it was the greatest Halo game, like those reviews who, all in unanimity, praised Halo 4 quite strongly. It received almost perfect scores from most publications on release. Technically, Halo 4 was a very solidly made game. You see, those years 343 spent recruiting for the studio were not in vain. They had among the best talent in the industry, but a notable lack of ex-Halo talent. There were of course some people who made the jump from Bungie to 343 like Frank O'Connor, but most of the veterans stayed loyal to Bungie for brand new opportunities. Their loyalty would of course be their downfall when Bungie kicked them in the face and shat on their creations, but that's another story. 343 was led by people who hadn't really worked together on a game before, and who certainly hadn't worked on a Halo game before. They hired people who were indifferent to, or who hated Halo. They had reasoning. It is good to get new perspective on things from experienced people with different views, people who were determined to give input that would push Halo in a given direction. They went in with a decidedly brand new approach. They were determined to leave their mark on the Halo series. With a radical new approach to aesthetics, story, gameplay, and music, they prided themselves on being a team comprised of talented people who had no experience with Halo. So, did these changes yield results? Let's start with the one everyone knows needs to be mentioned, the multiplayer. The changes to the multiplayer yielded, well, the word yield invokes farming analogies, and I guess in this case, if we're going to make the analogy, some of 343's changes are like using salt instead of fertilizer. That's what kind of yield we got. The multiplayer has gone down as the top contender for worst Halo multiplayer. Merely look at the population charts to see how the game fared. They did change how the charts tracked users, from unique users to daily peak, which does lower the numbers. But even given that, the game dropped users at an incredibly high speed. If gamers are poop, then Halo 4 had diarrhea. Why on earth did I write this? Where Halo 3 stood strong against Call of Duty 4 and World at War, fighting a battle for first position on Xbox Live Most Played, and Halo Reach battled with Black Ops and Modern Warfare 2, landing on third for most of its lifespan, Halo 4 lost instantly to Black Ops 2, holding number 1 for a brief moment before slipping out of the top 10 in less than a year. What made players abandon Halo 4, like God abandoned us? Well, for one, 343 looked out at the industry and looked at what was the most popular in the market. COD. Yes, Halo became a fishing simulator. It also copied Call of Duty as well. They added kill streaks, custom loadouts, perks, kill cams, hit markers, grenade indicators, score streaks, removed D-scope, and most importantly, and most satanically, they added sprint. It wasn't really a Call of Duty clone, per se. It still had Halo's time to kill, besides of course the 5-shot battle rifle, which just made it objectively worse than the DMR, and movement, largely. But that's perhaps even worse, because these things didn't gel with Halo's gameplay. It's like they just grabbed all these features from Call of Duty and just jammed them into Halo without playtesting, which makes it all the worse when you realize they probably did extensive playtesting and market research for this thing. Perhaps too much. I feel that they were looking to expand to a younger audience, and with the increasing prevalence of COD and its instant gratification dopamine hits, you know there were a ton of kids in those playtests who bitched about, "Why can't I run?" and "Why does getting shot remove me from scope?" It doesn't help that they also kept a lot of the negative aspects of Halo Reach that affected the population, especially for competitive modes. Things like armor abilities were actually much more egregious in 4. There was literally a wall hack one. You see, if Bungie were locked up in chains and forced to work on Halo again after Reach, they probably would have learned the mistakes they made in Reach. It was an experiment for them. 343 didn't make Reach, so they didn't really learn its mistakes. Instead, they doubled down on a lot of the worst aspects of Reach. I think the funniest thing was how effective some were versus others. The literal wall hack was on the same level as this shitty turret. 343 looked at the market and introduced these new features, thinking it would expand Halo to a new audience. Looking at the charts, it seemed as though Halo was losing to Call of Duty. But there is often a broad range of factors that affect trends, and just copying Call of Duty wouldn't exactly have turned their fortune around. They made the assumption that Halo needed to adopt new features. Instead, these features only hurt the gameplay. Anybody could spawn with a plasma pistol and plasma grenades. This ruined vehicle combat in big team battle. Anybody could spawn with a bolt shot, which basically functioned like a mini shotgun when you held it down. It was stupidly broken. They kind of defeated the whole point of the loadouts anyway, because there was no real player choice. Some weapon, perk, and ability combos were clearly superior to others. The DMR was clearly better than the battle rifle at launch. What was even the point of the carbine? It was also really hard to balance when some people could regenerate shields quicker, others could reload quicker. One support upgrade literally told you the location of the last dude to kill you. Infinity Slayer in Halo 4 was just a completely broken mess. The maps weren't actually too bad, besides the fact that they weren't scaled properly for sprint, which also saw its worst implementation in Halo 4. How do you design a map to be the right size for people sprinting, people moving normal speed, and people with infinite sprint? Well, you don't. It was super easy to escape from battles. It's funny that they actually ported the pit over to Halo 4, but they didn't really change the scale, so it was just a mess that you could cross in moments. The maps were also kind of unpolished. There were a ton of hiding spots and ways to break the maps, like this one that people could jump into in Flood. Speaking of which, the gimped custom games. The Flood couldn't hold weapons besides their swords. This made many game modes from previous Halos impossible to recreate. They also cut Assault, Race, VIP, Territories, Juggernaut, and more. Although they did add in some cool game modes like Regicide, Dominion, and Extraction. The custom games were really hurt by the terrible Forge mode. Halo Reach Forge had been a huge jump from Halo 3. You could basically use preset pieces to construct your own levels. Halo 4 seemed exciting with multiple Forge canvases, magnetism and trait zones, but it was probably the worst. The canvases were tiny, with little space to build your own structures. They fixed it months down the track by introducing this massive Forge Island template, but again, the damage was done. They added a dynamic lighting system, but the Forger had no control over it, so indoor objects were hard to see, and you had to wait for some loading screen whenever you switched to a human perspective. They even took out precision editing. Halo 4 Forge was rushed, and it was kind of a blunder. Halo 4 was for effectively nobody. The casual community was hurt by the fact that custom games were downgraded so much and went back to Reach. The competitive community was put out of its misery after the incapacitation from Reach, and they went back to Halo 3. The Call of Duty players that the game wanted to attract, well, they had Black Ops 2 to go back to. So Halo 4 really was for nobody. Halo 4 multiplayer also had more consolation awards than ever. You got points now, as well as medals. You get points for assists, points for distracting an enemy, points for anything.
No players are finishing the game with a 0.
Hail Mary.
And if you get enough of these points, you get a kill streak. But they were really lame compared to Call of Duty kill streaks. No heckin' wholesome puperinos to run around the map biting at other players' balls. You get a needler, or a speed boost or overshield, just a powerful item. So they clearly wanted to copy game design from Call of Duty but refused to commit, just making it a lame compromise that pleases nobody. Halo 4 did have worse player retention than any previous Halo. It started with a ton of hype but died quickly. It doesn't help that the progression was so weak. Competitive players said they felt alienated by the changes in Halo Reach. Well, how about Halo 4 just discarding ranked modes altogether? They did later add in this CSR system, which was only visible on the website, but by then the damage was done. Halo 4 focused on player growth, with the loadouts and progression system. They were noticing the changing currents in gaming regarding player investment systems. I mean, Bungie did too, hence Destiny. But Halo 4's progression ended up being quite shallow. There was a max level of 130, and along the way it unlocked armor and perks and different weapons. But many people hit the max rank in under a month. I think it's telling of my experience with the game that I literally never hit the Halo 4 max rank. It was the easiest max rank to reach, but I still just couldn't bring myself to play. People didn't really like the multiplayer, but the campaign is more divisive. There are plenty of people who enjoy it. The discussion on the campaign is more like a battle between two sides, not like which is the best pizza, where one is obviously superior, but like Clinton versus Epstein. The campaign was very well received. I will give spoilers, so this is your warning. Skip ahead if you want. I'm really not spoiling anything, at least nothing that isn't retconned by now. It starts where Halo 3 ended, with Chief in a freezer with his hologram girlfriend getting all touchy without his knowledge. The Ford Unto Dawn crash lands on an alien world, but this time instead of creating a torus in Blender, they added a sphere. This is a Forerunner world with many secrets, and this game reveals all of them. The Forerunners are revealed, and they're the main enemy, and you fight Voldemort's army of Bionicles. Like, dude, whoa, it represents like consumerism, dude. Man, that's deep. Voldemort gets cucked by his girlfriend and gives Chief superpowers to make him not get melted by the Ark of the Covenant. Master Chief kills Voldemort in a QuickTime event and Cortana dies by getting left behind on Voldemort's ship. Oh yeah, did I mention Cortana was going through a breakdown this whole time and Master Chief was learning how to deal with loss? He gets a whole lot more chatty. That's the B plot, and I'm gonna be real, it's the redeeming part of the game's story. Master Chief was always a husk, an almost silent protagonist who the player is meant to insert themselves into. It's not like Halo didn't have good characters, but you more witness these characters with interesting arcs rather than played as one. This is where the tension came from with the Arbiter in Halo 2, considering he actually is a character of his own. I mean, how are you supposed to feel like you are the character when that character has a ton of exposition while you're playing related to their own internal struggle that oftentimes is counter to your own objectives as the player? It feels more like you're controlling a meat puppet than personally inhabiting a world. It's also made worse by the fact that the game decides to take control away from you at opportune times for epic QuickTime event moments. I mean, you don't even beat the final boss yourself, for God's sake. It was annoying in Halo 3, but I think this cinematic stuff is worse. All this aside, I still liked Cortana's arc. The B-plot. They deconstructed Chief as a character and the hero archetype as a whole. It's not the first time this has happened, but easily the most in-depth for Halo. Marathon toyed with this a bit. Chief is literally the most important human and is universally loved. But the only person he relates to, the only friend he has, isn't even a human. It's a program designed to last only 8 years. It's ironic that the savior of mankind is really just sad and lonely. It's like he wasn't even meant to exist outside of the battlefield. That's the B plot. The A plot sucks. First of all, why does this shield world exist? A big part of Halo was its namesake. It was interesting to decode the mysteries of this location to find out its true function. What did Requiem exist for? It does exist for a reason, but it never matters in game. The location never has much story significance at all. We knew what Halo was for. Its function was central to the story of that game. But Requiem is just set dressing. The Didact is the main villain of the game. You know, Bungie literally cut the Forerunner City level from Halo 3, in part justified by not wanting to reveal too much about the Forerunners. They were meant to exist as a literary device, a mysterious ancient alien collective, the mystery of whom could serve as the backdrop for countless stories. People obviously wanted to know who the Forerunners were back then. People naturally want every mystery revealed. But mystery is an essential aspect of basically any story. Now, I know the Halo 3 terminals mentioned the Didact and the Librarian, but they were still very vague back then. And they were written by Frankie, who clearly had an agenda regarding the story. In the past, they hinted that the Forerunners could be ancient humans. There was a cut ending for Halo 2 which all but confirmed exactly that fact. I'm glad they cut that ending. The Forerunners shouldn't be revealed. I find it silly to just reveal the bad guys to be Bionicles and Space Voldemort. Speaking of, the villain only appears in 2 scenes. He's barely built up before being killed off, yet he's apparently some super important ancient evil. His wife appears in 1 scene. I won't blame anyone who misses that she was named the Librarian, an important character in the plot who's barely built up. She's an ancient message who was designed to speak to Chief when he arrives at this specific terminal, who activates Chief's almonds. And why does Chief have almonds? Why is the Librarian helping me? Why does the Didact hate humanity? Why was he locked away? Why is the Covenant back? Why do they worship the Didact? Why does the Didact have all these Bionicles? Okay, that's obvious because they're cool, but where did they come from and what are they? It turns out they're actually ancient humans who were melted down. I mean, I'm gonna be real. Of all the ways to go, becoming a Bionicle has got to be in the top 10. But either way, as it turns out, all these questions I posed do actually get answered in the books and other pre-release material. Look, I think it's fair for a sequel to rely on previous games for story context, but to be so heavily reliant on external material for so many fundamental story elements significantly weakens the game as a self-contained story. And the books themselves? Well, they're actually pretty good. They were written by Greg Bear. They contain intensely detailed and complex world building. but it has basically nothing to do with Halo. The plot could almost be read as a universe of its own. Just cut off some of the obvious connections. The way I see it, 343 wanted some legitimacy for their extended universe by seeking out an established sci-fi writer to write one of their books. But to win over somebody with that kind of clout to write for you, you've got to offer something good. Just imagine you're Greg Bear, you've worked your whole life for a career and you're top of your field. Would you really want to be stuck writing stories in an already established universe created by a bunch of kids for a game that already has a bunch of preset rules where you can't even tell the most important stories because they've already been told in the games? Well, I assume when speaking to Greg Bear, they had to offer him a bunch of creative freedom. What better way to give him all that freedom than by letting him write about the ancient world of the Forerunners? And he did write whatever he wanted. One stupid plot point is that they reveal the nature of the Forerunners, but then reintroduce basically the same literary device in the precursors. And some people say they want the precursors to come in Halo Infinite, but no, it's a terrible idea. Precursor literally means the exact same thing as Forerunners. They're the exact same concept, just recycled. They're the ones who came before, the ones who came before. And the Forerunners call themselves Forerunners. Look, it made sense for a group of ancient mysterious aliens to be dubbed Forerunners by the people who worship them hundreds of thousands of years later. But it makes no sense for the Forerunners to call themselves that. And besides that, I think the campaign is also quite poor for its weapon, enemy, and level design. The brand new Forerunner weapons are either almost identical to existing weapons, or just stupidly overpowered, with maybe the most interesting changes being an altering of the projectile speed for the shotgun. Why do these ancient bionicles use what are essentially human weapons? Because they're humans, yes, but they're laser guns. Why do they look and function and reload so much like the human kinetic weapons? I will admit that the dissolve effect was cool, and the sticky detonator was one addition that I thought was very cool. The saw and the railgun weren't bad either. And all of that is not to mention just how sparse the ammo was in the campaign. Your total ammo count was low and dropped weapons despawned really quickly. You often found yourself pinging bullet sponge enemies from cover with weak weapons. It forced you to play like a cover shooter. Speaking of those new enemies, they're horrendous. The Knights are just frustrating to fight because of how bullet spongy they are. They just have a ton more shield than the Covenant, and they can teleport around at random. There has to be a bit of variation in gunfights, but the Knights can literally just warp around the field with no continuity. They can surprise you at random for a one-hit kill. At least when elites pull out their sword or brutes go berserk, they're strong, but they will just run in a straight line right at you. They're predictable, and you can actually shoot them while they're charging at you. When the Knights are charging at you, there's nothing you can do. The Watchers suck as well. They have too much health for support enemies, and are way more powerful than other support enemies. They can also grab all the grenades you throw at them, which defeats the whole purpose of having grenades available to push enemies out of cover. They also shield the already heavily shielded Knights. They can resurrect fallen enemies on the battlefield and are just generally annoying. The crawlers are just trash mobs, but they don't really have any interesting variations like the grunts do. None of them use fuel rods or manned turrets. There were at least the sniper ones, but for the most part they'll just outnumber and annoy you. They'll never surprise you. The level design was also pretty bad. They were prettier, but less dynamic. They didn't respond to the player. This forest was beautiful and all, but none of the shrubs rustle when the player walks through them. It's all static, the world doesn't react to you. The levels were often just unfair. This Banshee spawn was god awful, because you literally get lit up as soon as you try to take off. It offers the Banshee to you, but then instantly punishes you for taking the offer. Or what about on Showdown, where there are these floating open platforms with barely any cover, plus Banshees and fuel rod enemies. If you hijack a Banshee, there's a good chance you'll die because the kill band on the floor is just so high up. Or what about this crawler fight that just lasted forever, literally just crawlers, with no cover? It's not like they were fun to fight in the first place. I also find it really funny how these floating platforms will just manifest right below your feet. I mean, you're literally in the Didact's ship. Surely you'd think he'd have control over it, right? Because it's shown that he has the ability to vanish platforms at will. Why wouldn't he just vanish the platform that you're standing on in this final mission? So, yes, I found Halo 4's game design lacking. And these are all things that many in the community at large feel as well. I think many of these flaws extend over to the Spartan Ops mode, the replacement for Firefight. Literally Call of Duty Spec Ops mode, but with Spartans, and also terrible. They pledged to release 50 missions within a fairly short period of time, with associated cutscenes and story. They released in packs of 5. Think about how long it takes to make a good mission. Even how long it takes to make something as simple as a Destiny strike that takes 10 minutes for the player to complete. Now imagine the quality you'd see if you released 5 new missions on a weekly basis. They wanted to do some episodic campaign thing. They launched with the first episode, which was 5 missions, and released the next few episodes of Season 1 over the next few months. There was never a Season 2. The missions were extremely repetitive, constantly reusing the same geometry from previous missions, from the campaign, and from multiplayer maps. The objectives were often brain dead, with enemy encounters that weren't really very well thought out. They were simultaneously too difficult and too easy. The enemies would often just swarm and surround you with insufficient cover on levels not built for gameplay, on encounters whose development was clearly rushed. But at the same time, you just use your multiplayer Spartan, perks and all. And oh yeah, if you died, it didn't set you back at all. You just respawn and kept chipping away at the enemies. It was a poorly conceived early version of a live service game. I appreciate their forward-thinking approach, but they just missed the mark so hard. Like I get whenever I remove Halo 4 from the disc tray and put in an actually good game. Just kidding, I filmed all of this on PC, I don't have a disc tray. We're still not done yet. You cannot mention people's issues with Halo 4 without touching on the art. There was a rapid shift in the art direction. Do you know what's funny about that? They tried to give an in-game lore justification for Master Chief's armor changing. Nanobots, son. They strongly hint that, at least. Although it is a bit vague, perhaps because they recognize how stupid that is. Because how did the nanobots change the entire Forward Unto Dawn, and the Covenant as well? Did they get nanobots? They should have just left it alone and wrote it off as a stylistic change, which is really what it was. At a surface level, Halo 4's art direction isn't bad. Chief is still noticeably human. He's still a big green space soldier. I think the scale of the world was good. It matched up to Bungie's vision of the game. You can see these giant vistas of impressive Forerunner architecture. It certainly does invoke some of the most awe-inspiring traits of classic sci-fi. It does have a hint of that classic Halo magic, but it misses so many of the subtleties that are core to Halo's visual language. It's a bunch of small differences that compound together to make this become this. For example, everything is over-designed. There are way too many extrusions and protrusions on everything. It is the exact opposite of functional. The classic elites were sleek and formidable enemies. Their angles and fins were evocative of aquatic life, which perfectly matched their characterization as swift, nimble, and efficient predators. In Halo 4, they look far more clumsy, more round and bulbous. Their silhouette was more redolent of some insectoid creature. All of the alien designs looked more reptilian, as opposed to perhaps avian or amphibian, and they looked more like monsters. It, well, alienated the aliens, which is understandable as a goal, but they just looked ugly. They also had these uncovered arms, and their armor was more like a vest. It invoked the feel of some kind of pirate faction, like they're more cavalier as opposed to the highly trained Covenant. But that isn't really indicated in the story. They worship the Didact, they're religious fanatics, just like the Covenant. The Forerunner architecture also missed the mark. They nailed the scale, but the design was off. It was far too organic. Way too many moving pieces. The structures were like limbs extending out of the world, with arteries and all. I guess that did accurately represent their status in the story, as opposed to being a story device for an ancient, long-dead civilization. They're awakened. Why doesn't Chief just give these ancient evils some rest every once in a while? Just gotta keep awakening them all the time. The classic Forerunner architecture was far more subtle and subdued. It was heavily inspired by brutalism, featuring these huge grey monoliths. There was also inspiration from sails and towers and monasteries. They were all old and worn, but stood the test of time over millennia, as opposed to 343's clean, pristine, maintained environments, as if they'd hired a cleaning lady for the past 100,000 years. Maybe that's what the monitors were doing that whole time. The structures were huge and stark and grey, with easily readable geometry from a distance. All the complexity became obvious when you viewed the objects up close. There was an incredible amount of detailed ornamentation, interesting geometry and symbology, but only when you were there actually looking for it. Halo 4 actually lacked this. It made up for it with a blinding level of flashing lights. It was like Tron. Not to mention the Prometheans, literally just rave bionicles, wearing glow sticks. They weren't even intimidating like 343 wanted them to be, with their giant bulbous bodies on skinny, lanky legs, not to mention the little baby in the booster seat that piloted them. 343 clearly had a vision on Halo 4, but they definitely missed the mark. Their generally busy design language applied to the Spartans as well. No more space nappy. Chief Suit couldn't jerk him off anymore. Perhaps that's why I was so sad. There were way too many bumps and random pieces of protective BMX gear hanging off the Spartans, and coloured undersuits. There was still a lot of work to do. 343 had a way to go to get where they are in Halo Infinite. The music, in retrospect, it was actually quite good. I think I judged the soundtrack too harshly due to the game it's in. I'm not actually using any of the music in this video because, unfortunately, Microsoft copyright strikes Halo 4 music. It's stupid, I know. It just means less people are going to get to hear it. It's not a good business move, it's not good for the fans of the community, but I guess there just isn't enough demand for it. But the music is actually really cool. It has a much heavier use of synth, creating textures that are in many ways more evocative of classic sci-fi. Like something from the 80s, using decidedly inorganic sounds to portray this world. It used more drones and had fewer notable melodies. It is darker and more foreboding, making heavier use of whales, almost being reminiscent of world music, to evoke this ancient atmosphere. Similarly to the recent Dune reboot, it is at points like some hallucinatory drug trip. This, however, became annoying very quickly when this woman wailing was the main menu music that started playing as soon as you load up the game. Anybody who's played it can remember this. The biggest issue with the soundtrack is its almost complete departure from previous Halo material. It's good to create something new, but they don't bring back any of the melodies or leitmotifs from classic Halo that had status, that actually had some equity in people's minds, that actually had some importance to the fans. They used Never Forget in the credits and that's it. Imagine a Star Wars movie that doesn't open with a Star Wars theme. It was also a tonal departure from classic Halo. Classic Halo was unique in its use of more upbeat and lively compositions that would play in combat. Its syncopation and melodies were unexpected in the genre. It was more suggestive of classical myth than a modern cinematic score like Halo 4 was. I want to gauge people's thoughts on this. Do you like Halo 4? Do you agree? Do you think 343 has responded to feedback over time? How would you say it compares to Halo Infinite? I've undoubtedly missed something and there's got to be something you, the viewer, disagree with, so let me know below. If you like the videos, thumbs up. If you dislike the video, thumbs up, subscribe, and donate to my Patreon. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Okay, let's say, hypothetically, the Halo ring does, as you say, remove all life in the galaxy. Let's also say that's been fired before. How then are we still here? Checkmate, demon.